Good evening, everyone. I'm Maurice Dubois.
And I'm Christine Johnson. Cheers in the Caribbean, opposition on Capitol Hill.
For the first time in more than half a century, the United States will resume a relationship with Cuba. And here's a look at what it means. The U.S. Embassy will reopen in Havana. Some travel restrictions will be lifted, but a tourist ban will remain in place. And cigar lovers will no longer have to hide their Cubans in their luggage.
CBS 2's Dick Brennan is here now with more on this development today. Dick?
Well, Maurice and Christine, the new policy may be historic, but it won't change realities for most Americans. And now the hard part, selling the plan. Many are already outraged.
Today, the United States of America is changing its relationship with the people of Cuba. In the most significant changes in our policy in more than 50 years.
President Obama moving to restore diplomatic relations with Cuba and, in effect, hoping to end an isolation of the country that went on for decades.
These 50 years have shown that isolation has not worked. It's time for a new approach.
That includes reopening embassies, lifting some travel restrictions for family and government and educational visits, but not tourists, and allowing Americans to return to the States with Cuban goods, including a limited amount of their famous cigars. But already many Cuban Americans are blasting the policy change, including Democratic New Jersey Senator Robert Menendez.
It is misguided and fails to understand the nature of the regime in Cuba that has exerted its authoritarian control over the Cuban people for 55 years.
The move to normalize relations began with a year-long negotiation between the Cuban president, Raul Castro, and the White House, in part brokered by Pope Francis. It culminated with the release today of American Alan Gross, held for 5 years in a Cuban prison.
I guess so far it's the best Hanukkah that I'll be celebrating.
Gross was swapped for 3 Cubans held in the U.S.
Trading Mr. Gross for 3 convicted criminals sends an extremely dangerous precedent. It invites dictatorial and rogue regimes across the world to use Americans serving overseas as bargaining chips.
But a Republican Congress has to vote to lift any embargo, and that could be heavy lifting. The push on both sides has already begun.
Today, America chooses to cut loose the shackles of the past, so as to reach for a better future.
What these changes are going to do is they will tighten this regime's grip on power for decades to come. And it will significantly set back the hopes of freedom and democracy for the Cuban people.
Now, Cuba also released a U.S. spy of Cuban origin who was held for 20 years. The president says the U.S. will review the designation of Cuba as a state sponsor of terror. And by the way, Senator Menendez, who right now is the chairman of the powerful Foreign Relations Committee and one of the most prominent Cuban Americans in Congress, says he was never even consulted by the White House on any of these matters. Maurice.
All right, Dick, thank you. Meantime, generations of Cubans arrived in the United States and never returned to their country. Union City, New Jersey has the second largest Cuban population outside of Miami. Many we spoke with told us it is time to move forward.
If it brings change to the island, and a political change especially, I guess it will be good.
When you open the door a little bit, light gets through, and that light eventually would brighten the whole room.
I'd rather have the Castros out and everything going back to democracy the way it was before.
And on Long Island, students rejoiced on CBS 2 News at 6 tonight how the children at Schechter School in Jericho have a deep connection to the newly freed Alan Gross. And then tonight on the CBS Evening News with Scott Pelley, in-depth team coverage of the Cuba developments, a closer look at Alan Gross's ordeal and the Pope's involvement. That's coming up at 6:30 right here on CBS 2.